My name is Allan Cruz. I'm the current president of the Marine Corps Coordinating Council, and on behalf of the council and all its member organizations and the Marines Club, we would like to thank you all very sincerely for taking the time out of your schedules to be here today. I don't know what it is about the Marine Corps that keeps us wandering back through the front gate 40 years after we had to fall in for formation, but that kind of magic works. And I know many of you came down from across the bay in Northern California, and of course, General Bierman and you and your staff that came up from MCRD to be our speaker today. We do appreciate you taking the effort. The Marines Memorial Club remains the destination of choice for the Marines in Western California, in the Western United States, anybody on this side of the world. And it's a good place to be, and it's a good organization to be part of. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Post.
Carry, colors. Ready, cut. Post the colors. Ready, cut. Ready, post.
Marines and guests, in the fashion of your own persuasion, your own religion, please follow with me. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you. We thank you so much for the opportunity that you give us to gather here today, to have a learning session, and to find out a few more good things that are happening in our world. We just ask your blessing upon all of our Marines, wherever they may be, in harm's way or otherwise, on their families, on all of our veterans and all of our service personnel, wherever they may be. We thank you for the food that you've provided for our nourishment to carry on your duties here on earth. And we just ask your blessing upon this whole world that hopefully will come out with a little peace very shortly. These things we ask in your holy name. Amen.
What I'd like to do now is announce the Marine of the Year Award for the Marine Corps Coordinating Council and tell you a little bit about our victim this year, our awardee. The recipient this year is Lieutenant Colonel John R. Stevens, USMC, retired. It's hard to start, other than chronologically, and all the things that John has done for this community, the Marine Corps, his family, his country, and keep it short because he's done so much. He is, how there's always in an organization, in any organization, there's always that one person that you sort of bring things to for, you ask questions, look for, advice, sort of get a course correction as necessary. And for those of us here in the Bay Area, that has always been John Stevens. There's just a lifetime of knowledge and wisdom that comes of that. If there ever was a definition of a national living treasure, it's our John. John enlisted born in 1921, enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1939, MCRD San Diego, while attending field telephone school with the Signal Detachment at MCRD. Assigned to 1st Defense Battalion, 1939. 1st Defense Battalion then goes out to the Western Pacific and has detachments in Wake, Palmyra Island, and Honolulu. Goes out on the USS Enterprise and Johnston Island. And this is before the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Comes back in time for Pearl Harbor. And the remnants of the 1st Defense Battalion are still at Pearl when they go back out to Palmyra Island after the attack. Shortly after that, he goes to Midway, and to act as a communications officer for Sand Island. And then he returned to the U.S. After that time frame. After a short tour as a coating officer for General H.M. Smith, this is not Camp Smith, this is the General Smith. At Camp Elliott, he was assigned to the Fort Monument as executive officer for further training in New Jersey. And then other training assignments that ultimately brought him back to 1st Marine Division and as the executive officer of the 1st Signal Company on Pavuvu Island. Pavuvu Island was the rest area after Guadalcanal and before Peleliu, before and after Peleliu, and then makes the campaign in Okinawa. And then a captain proceeds to the subsequent occupation of Okinawa. Then 45 and 46, he's the comm officer of the 7th Marines during the occupation of North China, based in Pitahau Beach, North China. Returns to the U.S. in 1946. A tour as a communications officer at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. At the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and then goes on to the 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton. Signed as commanding officer, Company A, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines in 1949, and took that unit to Korea as part of the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade on the Pusan perimeter. So the fire brigade that goes into Korea right after the invasion of South Korea by the communist forces up north. He participates in the Incheon landing, where he commands the lead company, the point of the spear, Alpha 15. As part of that action and part of the after-action reports, writes the recommendation for the Medal of Honor for Lieutenant Valderrama Lopez. Is that correct, sir? And was successful in making that happen and so starting that up. The over-the-wall picture you see at Incheon that we all know, second only to the raising the flag at Iwo Jima, was very much his action in that time frame as a company commander. Then goes up to the capture of Seoul, and then the Chosin Reservoir. Now we're starting to get some real work out of him, okay? And then he comes back from Korea, finishes off various staff assignments, commanding officer, Marine Barracks, Naval Supply Center, Oakland, assistant G3 Paris Island Recruit Training Depot, senior instructor, Weapons Training Group, Basic School, Quantico, Amphibious Warfare School, commanding officer, Headquarters Battalion Basic School, followed by a tour in Maryland where he received a BS degree in military science. Cross-training program, 2nd Marine Air Wing, general staff assignments, and then joined the 1st Marine Brigade in Kaneohe as the assistant G3. From June 60 to 61, XO of the 4th Marine Regiment, and in 61 till retirement was assigned commanding officer, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, 1st Marine Brigade. John, I deliberately went through this in this detail because for all the years I've known you, we've glossed that over. Everybody knows who you are and what you've done, and we love you for it. But every once in a while, if we don't take the time to acknowledge all the good things you do and say it out loud, who else will? And who else will appreciate? Who but this crowd can appreciate what you just heard? We know that life. We've lived many portions of it. Every once in a while, I like to say that everything, as I look around the room, everything the United States Marine Corps has done is present in this room. And then I look at the younger Marines and say everything that we're going to do is also resident in this room, especially given the fact we've got the CG of MCRD speaking to us today. But John, you've done everything the Marine Corps has done at this point, and we acknowledge that, and we do thank you for that, okay? After that, John goes to IBM, breaks out, does a startup company, and then he gets caught in that vicious cycle here in the Bay Area where you get one success after the other. President and CEO of StellarNet, the other startup companies, and has done extremely well. But that other side of John is also that which gives to the community. He's headed up and been the founding board member of the USS San Francisco Memorial, been a board member here at the Marines Club, Marines Memorial Association. He and Don Reed together are the driving force behind the Korean War Memorial Foundation, which is coming up, as both the heart, brains, fire, and soul of that effort, as well as significant contributors. It's been a life well led, sir, and everything that we see and we're saying about you, shows that, the strength of your friends gives you courage. The courage of your enemies does you honor. Sir, your life does us honor, and we thank you for it.
Well, first I'd like to say thank you. I'm extremely honored. I don't know how much I'm going to have to pay Allan for that long biography. That was too much. But everything that I've done has been accomplished with the help of other people. And many of you are in this room, and thank you. And thank you.
So on behalf of General Myatt, I would like to welcome everybody here. General Myatt had a conflicting engagement over at the Veterans Building to do with the San Francisco War Memorial, but he sends his greetings and wishes that he could be here. A quick party political broadcast. If you're in this group and you're not a member of the Marines Memorial Association, it's not too late to join. And I'll be waiting for you in the lobby at the elevator on your way out. So he's the first active duty Marine officer out of Virginia Military Institute since 1973. We had quite a dry spell. And you think a place as storied as Virginia Military Institute, but it just goes to prove there must be a conspiracy of Citadel guys and Norwich guys. But we're glad to see you up there representing Virginia Military Institute and representing all the Marines that you've had the privilege to lead. So please welcome my good friend and one of America's great combat heroes, General Chip Bierman.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. I want to start by saying how excited and glad I am to be here at the Marine Memorial. This is actually the first time beyond a trip I made into the lobby about 20 years ago. I was a young captain with my new bride and stopped by to see if there was any room at the inn, and they were very nice to me. But it was full that day, and I haven't been back since. But I've really been looking forward to getting up to this really iconic location and getting a chance to see it. I made the comment to Chris Starling, who has just been wisely offered employment here, having walked around and seen all the historical memorabilia and the library and the bar. He's a better man than me, because I know if I was here, I'd never get anything done at all. But let me before I get into my comments, there's some folks that I'm traveling with that I'd like to take a second and introduce. I'm with the Sergeant Major of Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego and the Western Recruiting Region, Sergeant Major James Porterfield. Really glad to be with him. Colonel Wayne Sinclair is the Assistant Chief of Staff for Recruiting, as Chris mentioned, another fellow alumni of the Virginia Military Institute. Over here is Chief Warrant Officer Tom Walker, who's the head of our region training team. That great belt-fed looking captain there is Captain Lamberto Matarine. He's my aide-de-camp. I hired him just because he had a great reputation as being a superstar company commander down there in the recruit training regiment. And then I also want to introduce some folks I know who are more familiar to you. Major Chris Esri, the commanding officer of Recruiting Station San Francisco, and Sergeant Major Lichty. Thanks. But look, great to be here with everybody. It was pointed out that I am the commanding general of Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego and the Western Recruiting Region, MCRD San Diego and WRR. And let me take a second to talk a little bit about what that means. I know that a lot of you have some level of familiarity with the command, but let me tell you about it. Our mission is recruiting young men and women, finding the folks with the mental, the physical, and the moral background to be Marines in the western two-thirds of the United States, west of the Mississippi River, and then bringing them, if they're men, to MCRD San Diego, and our females to Parris Island, to the recruit depots where we train and transform them during entry-level training. The recruiting effort is carried out by about 1,500 recruiters located in about 750 locations in the western two-thirds of the United States. Annually, we recruit about 52% of all the Marines who come into the Marine Corps. At MCRD San Diego, we train just over half of all Marines who go through enlisted entry-level training, and that work is primarily carried out by about 580 drill instructors down there at San Diego. Last year, we made over 17,000 enlisted Marines, and the Western recruiting region was also responsible for about 670 of our officers who were commissioned as lieutenants. So, you know, when you add in the great efforts of MCRD Parris Island and the Eastern recruiting region, you get the total effort of the United States Marine Corps on recruiting and entry-level training. I'll say right up front, the mission is incredibly important. We have the responsibility for pumping the lifeblood of the United States Marine Corps. Without entry-level training, there is no Marine Corps as we all know it. The twin efforts of recruiting and recruit training are the cornerstone, as they have always been, of every success that the Marine Corps has had. They're inextricably linked to each other. They're different sides of the same coin, and I'll try to make the case as I proceed through my comments that they're inextricably linked to our readiness and our ability as United States Marines to fight and win on short notice. Now, I recognize, you know, that any high-tempo organization could have somebody stand up and make a case about the critical importance of the recruiting and the entry-level training efforts. I understand that. But I'll say that they're particularly important to the Marine Corps because of the nature of who we are and what our organization is. I make that statement for a number of reasons. First of all, at the end of the day, the Marine Corps, more than anything else, is a people organization. It's always been that way, and it always will be that way. We just had the honor of having our Commandant, General Joe Dunford, out in San Diego, and in the process of an amazing talk, which he gave to a number of the leadership of the Marine Corps Recruiting Command. He started off by talking about all the challenges that face the Marine Corps at this point in our history as he begins his tenure as the 36th Commandant. He talked about Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, whether they're done with us, even as we attempt to break contact and be done with them. We're probably not. The transition to the Pacific. He talked about the roles and missions debates and the budgetary pressures we're under. You know, what's the Marine Corps' role in an increasingly dangerous world with regard to readiness? How are we going to lay down our MEWs and our special purpose MAGTAFs and our FAST teams? You know, what is the role of the MEF headquarters? And we need to make sure that that's viable to go out in all of our big deliberate war plans. Making sure that we keep the Osprey, the F-35 on track, even as we seek to produce the amphibious combat vehicles. So he laid out, you know, all these different challenges. What is the role of females in our Corps going to be as we go forward? And then he said, you know, we're going to do our best to get all these things right. We're going to make sure we keep the Marine Corps, you know, pointed, aligned with true north. He said, but we're probably we're not going to get everything exactly right. We're going to be a couple degrees off. But you know what? As long as we get the people piece of the Marine Corps right, we're going to be okay. If we continue to bring the best young men and women into the Marine Corps, and we create an environment where they can step up and do the things that the Corps needs to be, all that other stuff will fall into place. And it was really a great reiteration by our commandant of who we are. But there's some other reasons that I would also mention as to why our recruiting and recruit training efforts are particularly important to the Marine Corps. One of the distinguishing characteristics of the Marine Corps is the fact that we're the youngest of the branches of the armed forces in terms of average age. At any given time, 70% of our Corps is comprised of first-term Marines. We have right now in the Marine Corps plus or minus about 144,000 Marines who are in the grades of sergeant and below. Every year about 35,000 Marines, plus or minus, depending on the year, will leave our Marine Corps and return to American society. But think about the implications of that fact. What that means is the vast majority of all Marines are on their first enlistment, and more than any other service, as these Marines leave, having served their Corps and their country proudly, they have to be replaced, and the Marine Corps depends on a continual influx of quality men and women coming in behind them. The Marine Corps is a highly efficient, but also a very finely tuned machine. The right numbers in the right quality must come in as Marines leave our Corps, significant numbers of Marines on an annual basis. Turnover is a constant in our Corps. The other thing that I would talk about with regard to why recruiting and recruit training are particularly important to the Marine Corps is the fact that we're a small, lean organization. There's not a great deal of padding or any sort of shock absorber. Any interruption of steady, quality input will have a dramatic effect on the Marine Corps, and it will immediately affect our operational forces. By way of comparison, in 2013, the United States Army missed its recruiting mission by plus or minus about 13,000 young men and women. They continued to struggle in 2014, but I actually haven't heard the final official tally of how much they missed mission by last year. Service rivalry aside, I will tell you all, there's no Marine who takes any joy in that fact. The nation needs a strong Army. But as bad as that news is for the United States Army, it just doesn't have the effect on them that a comparable failure would have on the United States Marine Corps. To a certain extent, they're so large, they can absorb and they can buffer their recruiting failures. And because they're not America's 911 force, as we are, they'll have time prior to a contingency or an emergency to shuffle their people around and figure it out. We don't have that luxury. We can't afford any interruption of the flow of young men and women into our Corps because we are truly a come-as-you-are organization. Any sort of deviation on the front end in terms of our numbers or our quality will have an immediate impact on readiness, so we have to continue to prime the pump. As Sergeant Major Porterfield and I travel around and we spend time with those great recruiters, or we talk to the drill instructors and the other Marines who support that effort in MCRD, we always take the time to talk to them about what the command does to make sure they understand the importance to the Marine Corps and the nation. And we make the case that our mission is truly one that's worthy of everybody's very, very best efforts. And I'll tell you, I think they get it. And their dedication is truly inspiring. We are right now, at this point in time, having unprecedented success in our recruiting and our recruit training effort. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that Before I hit you with some of the numbers and statistics, I thought I'd hit pause for a second and tell a story, which I think makes the case as well as anything else as to how we're doing right now on Marine Corps recruiting. But in the fall of 13, and the great thing is it's a local story, occurred right down the road here. In the fall of 13, shortly after my assumption of command of the Western Recruiting Region in MCRD San Diego, I was traveling around with Sergeant Major Porterfield, and we were visiting some of the Bay Area recruiting offices. I was actually traveling with Major Cruz. But as we pulled up in front of recruiting substation Fremont, Chris asked me if I would be willing to take the time to award a Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medal to a standout Marine who after a year on recruiting had been identified as the recruiter of the year for the station. And of course I jumped at that opportunity. You know, what's not to like about something like that? But as I entered the recruiting station, the Sergeant Major was walking ahead of us, and the Marines were already positioned and in a small formation. So I walked in front and got ready to do the business of presenting this award. But a Marine walked up and stepped in front of me, Sergeant Garber, and my first impression was, you know, this is the sharp-looking, squared-away Marine. He looked the part. I would later learn that he was an infantry Marine. He had come from my old regiment in 3rd Marines, and in 6.5 years there had completed 4 combat deployments, 2 to Afghanistan and 2 to Iraq, and he'd been decorated for his conduct and his heroism in combat. The recruiting citation, the award that was read, was impressive in its own right. It was very clear, if you knew a little bit about recruiting and you heard the stats, that this was a Marine who had worked very hard, who had performed at an incredibly high level, and who had done everything that the Marine Corps needed him to do as a recruiter. But as I stepped in front of Sergeant Garber, you know, to put that pin that name on his chest, I did what officers typically do in that situation, and you know, I made some comments to him, congratulatory type of comments. But amongst other things, I said to him, "Hey, Sergeant, I'm really glad to see that after only a year out here, you've already earned an impact award. That's a nice accomplishment." And then in reply, Sergeant Garber said to me, and he said it very matter-of-factly. It was not said in a boastful way, but he said, "Actually, General, this is the second award that I've received on recruiting." And that surprised me. So I said, "Did you have an end of tour award follow you from 3rd Marine Regiment, Sergeant?" And he said, "No, sir. This is the second impact award that I've received on recruiting." So now I'm looking at Major Esri, thinking, what kind of outfit we running here? We giving out awards willy-nilly here in recruiting station San Fran. But at the conclusion of that little award ceremony, I approached Sergeant Garber. And I said, "Hey, explain to me the circumstances of the first medal you received prior to this one that I gave you." And he said to me, "Well, sir, it was the darndest thing." He said, I was working in the substation one day when we looked up and a Navy officer and a couple chiefs stopped by. We came to attention like Marines will always do. And the officer then, they read a citation and he presented me with a Navy Achievement Medal. As it turned out, over the previous 4 months, I had given 4 referrals, young men, to the Navy recruiters next door, people that I liked, but I said, you know, you're pretty good, but you're not quite what we're looking for in the Marine Corps. And when they ran the numbers, it turned out I was one of their top recruiters for that period. Now look, I know we got a room full of Marine veterans, and all of you are always on the alert for a big, tall sea story. So in order to prove this one, I brought a visual aid with me, and I'd like to ask, he's since been meritoriously promoted, now the Staff NCOIC of Recruiting Substation Salinas, but I'd like to ask Staff Sergeant Kalani Garber back there to stand up. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Hey, I'll tell you, I never get tired of telling that story. Fun, motivating, kind of makes you want to run 10 miles and punch something. But, on a serious note, I'll tell you all that within that vignette are all the elements of what's happening out there on Marine recruiting right now. The standards we maintain, the unprecedented success, the quality of Marines that we're assigning to the duty, and the way that these Marines put their heart and their soul into everything that we do. And if I had one of the drill instructors here, in that great-looking campaign cover, I promise you that you'd be similarly impressed. But I will tell you all that the success we're having right now at this point with regard to recruiting and recruit training, that's not something that any Marine takes for granted, and least of all us. It hasn't always been that way, and it's been a long, tough road getting to where we are right now in the Marine Corps. There have been times in recent history where our recruiting and our recruit training efforts have gotten so ugly that they actually threatened our institutional identity and mission, and they even moved up to the point where the possibility of them undercutting our relationship with the American people had to be considered. And I suspect that to a certain degree I'm preaching to the choir, because a lot of you who served in our Corps during the 70s and 80s have some sense of what I'm talking about. But to that point, what I'd like to do is take a few minutes, and I'd like to talk about the history of recruiting and recruit training since the advent of the all-volunteer force. The story of how we fought and scraped to get into the strong position we're in today. Success always has 1,000 fathers, but I think the true credit for revolutionizing the process of how we make Marines really primarily belongs to two great Marine Corps generals and commandants that you're all very familiar with, and I speak of General Lew Wilson and General Robert Barrow. We've had a lot of commandants since that have done incredible things to support the effort, but Wilson and Barrow are the ones that started the revolution. As I tell this story, which I'll get right into, I want to make sure I give credit to a friend of mine, another VMI graduate, the current commanding officer of the 6th Marine Corps District, Colonel Bill Bowers. Bill just completed a brilliant and extensive study of the history of Marine Corps recruiting and recruit training, and in preparing my comments to be with all you today, I did heavily leverage his work and had a lot of conversations and back and forth with Bill about how to tell the story. But the story starts in 1973. At that time, the decision was made to transition our military to an all-volunteer force. And at that point, as many of you know very well, the Marine Corps, without this additional challenge, was already under extraordinary stress and challenge from internal and external pressures. As we transitioned from a long war in Vietnam, in 1973 we had the worst disciplinary and absentee rate of any of the armed services. Drug use was rampant and racial tension was high. Externally, we faced severe criticism of the viability of our amphibious mission. We looked at a lack of training opportunities and decreasing readiness, and we were significantly, crossing swords with the United States Navy over the future of marine aviation. The implementation of the all-volunteer force superheated these already existing problems. And initially, the Marine Corps neither understood what was going to be required to recruit an all-volunteer force, nor was the Marine Corps willing to make the changes necessary to ensure that we did it the right way. Our recruiting effort was undermanned, it was under-resourced, and it was seen as extremely undesirable duty by almost any Marine you could name. Marines understood the importance of the recruiting effort, but they just felt like it was an important effort that somebody else ought to be doing besides them. Not surprisingly, within 6 months of the implementation of the all-volunteer force, the Marine Corps faced a full-blown crisis. In FY 73, the Marine Corps barely made its recruiting mission. But in a desperate effort to make the numbers, all aspects of quality were completely sacrificed. In the spring of '74, the Marine Corps was barely making 45% of its assigned mission, despite enlisting the lowest quality of any of the armed forces. That year, Congress passed a law stipulating that 55% of the armed forces had to be high school graduates. The Marine Corps was unable to meet this threshold, and they enlisted less than 50% high school graduates in that year. 14% of those were from the lowest acceptable mental category, as tested on the ASVAB, what we call Category 4. Things got so bad within a year of the implementation of the all-volunteer force that the Commandant at the time, General Robert Cushman, appeared in testimony before Congress in 1974 and asked for relief from the requirement of enlisting 55% high school graduates. He stated that he did not believe in the value of a high school diploma as a sole indicator of the success of a Marine. So, within a year of the implementation of the all-volunteer force, you had a Marine Corps Commandant, you had the spectacle of a Marine Commandant appearing before Congress and asking Congress to lower the military standards for the Marine Corps. Predictably, Congress turned down the request by the Marine Corps, but only when the Marine Corps fell short of its FY '74 mission by more than 9,000 recruits, despite sacrificing every aspect of quality, did Congress allow some relief for the Marine Corps from the high school graduation requirement. Seeking to make its numbers, the Marine Corps continued to compromise its standards, and in many cases, we enlisted those that no other service would touch. Many of those enlisted at that point were convicted felons, high school dropouts, and from the lowest mental category. In order to turn these often unmotivated and troublesome individuals into Marines, our boot camps became progressively more brutal. Motivation platoons were stood up at both recruit depots to handle the worst recruits. The thought process behind the motivation platoons was pretty simple. We will raise the level of physical and mental pressure on problem recruits to such a high level that they have no choice but to conform. And this placed, as you can all imagine, our officers and our drill instructors under tremendous pressure. They were put in incredibly stressful situations as they struggled to make Marines from terrible raw material. Major General Robert Barrow, who was the commanding general of Parris Island during this period, he issued a standing invitation for 3 straight years to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Cushman, saying, "Sir, Commandant, you need to come down to Parris Island and you need to look and see what I'm seeing to better understand the impact that the recruiting failures are having on recruit training and our Marine Corps." But the Commandant did not take him up on that offer. Reflecting back on this period, a great Marine General, Walt Boomer, would say this, quote, we have proved that our recruit training, as good as it is, cannot turn unintelligent, poorly motivated, physical wrecks into United States Marines. Recruiting high applicants for the Corps is terribly expensive, but the price of not doing it is disaster," unquote. The Marine Corps still hadn't sunk as low as we were ultimately going to sink, but help was on the way. In June of 1975, Lew Wilson was promoted to full general and he became Commandant of the Marine Corps. At his assumption of command, Wilson laid out his intent in one very short sentence to the entire Marine Corps. "I call upon all Marines to get in step and to do it now and do it smartly." Amongst the many challenges that he faced, Wilson was determined to first and foremost fix recruiting and recruit training. One of the first things he did was call on Major General Robert Barrow to become the Marine Corps' new manpower chief. He pulled him up from Parris Island. I think you all are familiar with both of these two legendary Marines, but it's hard to imagine a more respected and qualified pair of Marine generals stepping up to solve the Marine Corps' manpower crisis than these two. Besides the fact that each was a highly respected combat commander, Lew Wilson, a Medal of Honor winner on Guam, Rob Barrow, a Navy Cross winner at the breakout from Chosin. They were also intimately familiar with the process of recruiting and recruit training. Wilson had served as a commander of a Marine Corps recruiting district, the 6th Marine Corps recruiting district, and General Barrow, as I mentioned, had served as the commanding general of MCRD Parris Island. They immediately began critical reforms. First, the decision was made that instead of having two separate efforts, the recruiting and the recruit training efforts would now report directly, in each case, to the commanding generals at San Diego and Parris Island. So you now had a unified effort, and you had a general who was responsible for recruit training, being able to provide guidance and set the standards for the recruiting effort, which was bringing the young men and women to the drill fields. And that continues to this day. The standard of 75% high school graduates was set for the Marine Corps. And then third, and very significantly, General Wilson immediately moved to initiate an effort to remove the Marines from our Corps who demonstrated their inability or unwillingness to conform. And he had a very simple formula, he and General Barrow. We're going to raise the health, the climate, the readiness, and the combat effectiveness of our Corps by getting rid of those who don't belong, and then we're going to replace them with young men and women of significantly higher quality. A zero-sum game, but tremendously dependent on a significant improvement to the recruiting and the recruit training effort. So the tone had been set. The Marine Corps began to gain altitude and airspeed. But within 6 months of Wilson becoming commandant, disaster struck. On 6 December 1975 at MCRD San Diego, a recruit by the name of Lynn McClure was beaten so severely during pugil stick training that he died from his injuries. He had been assigned to the Recruit Training Regiment Motivation Platoon, and in the process of a training day, he had been made to repeatedly take on larger and stronger recruits, and then he'd been struck multiple times in the head as he tried to escape, and later died from his injuries. But a look at Lynn McClure, and God rest his soul, a young man trying to become a United States Marine, and I'm not trying to tread on his memory, but a look at Lynn McClure starkly demonstrates the depths to which, at that point in our history, we had sunk in terms of sacrificing all aspects of quality in the Marine Corps. McClure was a high school dropout, a 10th grade dropout. He had multiple felony convictions and arrests on his record. He had tried to enlist in the Army and the Air Force, but he'd been rejected for scoring a 7% on the ASVAB. There's still some debate about whether or not he might not have been mildly mentally retarded, as opposed to just somebody who scored at the bottom of our test. But somehow he was permitted to enlist in the Marine Corps. He shipped to MCRD San Diego, and when he got in trouble and showed an inability almost immediately to stay with the normal recruit training program, he was transferred over to the motivation platoons. In the media firestorm that followed McClure's death, the Marine Corps really faced the prospect of losing recruit training as we knew it. There were a lot of people who said, we're going to have to step in and run this for the Marine Corps because they can't be trusted to do it themselves. Commandant Wilson sprang into action as the head of our organization to restore the faith of the American people. He testified before Congress on a number of significant reforms that he would make immediately to recruit training, including the elimination of the motivation platoons. There's a famous story from that period. Wilson was walking in to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he said to his aide, call San Diego, call Parris Island, make sure the motivation platoons have been stood down. Then just before he walked into the room, his aide came back and said, sir, they've stood it down in San Diego. They have not yet stood it down in Parris Island. And General Wilson said, I'm going in to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee that they've been stood down. So I suggest the commanding general of Parris Island be able to tell me that it was stood down during the course of the next hour while I testify. And as I understand, the signs were coming down and the bulldozers were filling in the motivation ditch as he was testifying. But in an effort to increase But in an effort to restore the faith of the American people in Marine Corps recruit training, there were a number of significant reforms that were made. The number of officers assigned to each recruit company and series at both recruit depots was doubled. And an additional general was assigned to each of the recruit depots to reinforce the supervisory program. But just as significantly as the recruit training reforms, the standout of the motivation platoons, the increase to supervision, General Wilson and Barrow recognized that the other side of the coin, the recruiting effort, was going to have to be changed. We were going to have to get control of the engine that was supplying the raw material to the recruit depots. A little over a year later, within a year of this incident, General Wilson, with General Barrow by his side, they made a number of reforms to recruiting that continue to be the mainstays of our effort to this day. A systematic guidebook that was then, and we still call it the Volume 1, was written to govern all aspects of recruiting and standardize it across the entire Marine Corps. A hand-picked team of officers and staff NCOs was selected to visit every recruiting district, station, and substation in order to physically install the components of that system. Manpower screening teams were stood up at every major command to screen and select quality staff NCOs and NCOs to make sure we were getting some of our best Marines out on recruiting. It's not accidental that I brought this poster with me, and that is Commandant Wilson, and that poster came out during his tenure as Commandant, and it was him changing the way that recruiters were viewed in the Marine Corps. Him saying, "I did recruiting. It's an honorable business, and I need some of the best Marines out there on recruiting." And then General Wilson also implemented the career recruiter MOS, so as we had great Marines go out there, become successful on recruiting, they could stay on that duty and continue to do that business for the Corps. When Wilson relinquished the commandancy in 1979, his successor was his trusted protege and partner in this effort, General Robert Barrow, who is by now serving as the assistant commandant. But when he took command of the Corps, General Barrow's first order to his Marines was very simple, but everybody knew exactly what he meant. He said, "Keep in step." More specifically, he told the recruiters, he said, "I think if we choose to, we can push all the way up to, if not get very close, to 100% high school graduates." Early in his first year as Commandant, he also told the entire Marine Corps, and I quote, "In peacetime, the most important thing that the Marine Corps can do is to recruit well," unquote. Commandant Barrow created the Commandant Superior Achiever Award in 1971 to recognize those recruiting stations in the country that had met or exceeded the Marine Corps' quality and quantity goals in every measurable category. And that continues to be the Superior Achiever Award, one of the most sought-after awards on Marine Corps recruiting, and it continues to be one that is presented to recruiting station commanders personally by the Commandant of the Marine Corps. We actually just had, as I mentioned, General Dunford out in San Diego in December presenting the Superior Achiever Award. 16 of 24 stations in the Western Recruiting Region got it. I'm proud to report that RS Recruiting Station San Francisco was one of those stations. But throughout General Barrow's tenure as Commandant from 79 to 83, he continued to focus on improving the quality and the quantity of Marines entering our operating forces through the recruiting and recruit training. The Marine Corps still faced challenges, but by the time he left the Marine Corps in 1983, we were well on the way. You had two respected commandants over a period of 8 years make recruiting and recruit training one of the highest priorities in the Corps. It's probably not accidental that a year after General Barrow left the commandancy, that you had a book in 1984 called First to Fight, published by Lieutenant General Brute Krulak, who had been Wilson's chief of staff when he was out at Marfor Pac. And one of the things, as we all know, probably looking back at the wreckage and then the progress we'd made, initial wreckage, and then the progress we'd made over the last 8 years, General Krulak talks very pointedly about the obligation we have as United States Marines to turn over a better citizen after a period of service in the Marine Corps. So these two amazing leaders, General Wilson and General Barrow, they knew what it took to make a good Marine, and they would not let anyone within the institution or outside it dilute their deeply held conviction that the core strength of the Marine Corps was and always would remain the quality of the individual Marine. Other commandants since Wilson and Barrow have made their impact on recruiting and recruit training to continue the revolution that they sparked, but those two are the real fathers of it. In 1994, facing another very, very tough recruiting period, Commandant Mundy directed the formation of a Marine Corps recruiting command to provide a unity of effort to facilitate a standardized one-corps approach to recruit training and to bring about the steady improvement to the overall recruit training process. He described the new recruiting command as follows, quote, "Marine Corps Recruiting Command is the only regiment in the Corps that is in constant contact with its objective 30 days a month without let up, and it's the toughest job at any grade in the Marine Corps." A year later, in 1995, recruiting got another boost when the Secretary of the Navy, at General Mundy's strong urging, approved the Marine Corps recruiting ribbon, which to this day in the Marine Corps is known as the Red Badge of Courage. But General Charles Krulak succeeded General Mundy in the summer of 1995. Like General Mundy, Krulak had served at Headquarters Marine Corps during the Wilson-Barrow manpower reforms. And during Commandant Krulak's tenure in the late 90s, all of the services struggled mightily to meet their accession goals. Conventional wisdom at the time held that all the services were going to have to relax their standards. And every other service but the Marine Corps relaxed both their recruiting and their recruit training standards. General Krulak, however, flying in the face of this notion and with full confidence in the recruiting force that had been so painstakingly built, he chose instead, at one of the toughest periods in our recruiting history since the 70s, to raise the standards for the Marine Corps, to raise the enlistment standards. I had the opportunity with a couple other folks in the room to talk to Sergeant Major Lee, who, as you remember, was his Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps at the time. And he said, "You know, sir, it kind of went like this. General Krulak looked at Desert Storm and he looked at Mogadishu. Based off those two conflicts and what Marines had done, he saw the imperative for a strategic corporal who could operate on the three-block battlefield of the future. One who could make tactical decisions that might potentially have strategic implications. But as he looked at the need for this kind of NCO, this young leader in the future, and he then walked back and looked at our recruiting standards at the time, he said, we can't get there from here. If we're not willing to raise the standard and the quality of the young men and women that we're coming in, we can't do what we need to do on future battlefields." And so at a time when every other service was missing its recruiting mission, General Krulak raised the recruiting standards of the Marine Corps. The DoD requirement was 90% high school graduates. General Krulak demanded 95%. The DO standard was 60% from the highest mental category, mental group 1 to 3 alpha. General Krulak said, we're going to do it at 63%. And while DOD would allow up to 10%, mental group 1 to 4 alpha, General Krulak said, we're not going any higher than 1%. He made other significant changes as well. He created the Recruiting Warrant Officer Program, which was modeled after the Marine Gunner Program. And even more significantly, he directed his Manpower Management Department to implement a more formal screening process which would select the best majors for recruiting duty. What he intended to do was to transform the billet of recruiting station commander from a career-ending billet to something that was truly sought after by the standout majors in the Marine Corps. And I can tell you that prioritization continues to this day. Back in the late summer, I was back at Quantico and a member of the recruiting station CO board. We reviewed the records of over 540 Marine majors. We got first pick before anybody else in the Marine Corps, and we picked the best 17 to go out there and do recruiting duty. And then, you know, the changes General Krulak made didn't stop with recruiting. In an effort to get the most from the high-quality force that we were recruiting, he went in there and he looked at our recruit training, and he also made it tougher and more challenging. At a time when the other services were watering down their entry-level training, in part based on recruiting pressures, he extended Marine boot camp by a week, and it was already the longest entry-level training of any of the services. And he implemented a grueling 54-hour evolution called the Crucible. And then in his tenure as Commandant, he worked for and got permission to have a drill instructor ribbon. It should also be noted that during every single month, 48 months of General Krulak's tenure as Commandant, despite higher enlistment standards, and tougher recruit training, the Marine Corps Recruiting Command alone, of all the services recruiting organizations, made its recruiting mission every single month. And then General Krulak's successor, General Jim Jones, would continue this unbroken string of success for another 4 years as Commandant. So that's a little bit of history on how we got to where we are today. And I will tell you all that pride and success continues right up to the very present, where Marine recruiters and drill instructors are concerned. We continue to spare no effort to find individuals with the talent, the energy, the commitment, and the performance capabilities to be Marines. And in the process, we do not compromise our standards. There are standards still imposed by DOD. There are Marine Corps standards, and at this point in recruiting, we are even exceeding our own high standards. Last year, of almost 35,000 Marines that were enlisted into our Corps, 99.9% were high school graduates. The only ones that weren't, it was probably some issue with the young man or woman being homeschooled, but they had the equivalent of a high school education. 74% of the Marines that we enlisted were from mental group 1 to 3 Alpha, and of almost 35,000 Marines that we put into the Corps last year, about 3 dozen had any sort of felony conviction, and those were all waivers that were only approved at the general officer level. Our recruiting philosophy remains one of leveling a challenge. From day one, young men and women are told that the Corps won't change for them. It's their responsibility to adjust and conform. Maybe you can be one of us if you have what it takes, continues to be the Marine Corps recruiting slogan. We're the only branch of the armed forces that recruits people specifically to fight. And some of our recruiting numbers were at their very highest during the heights of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our recruiting slogans don't say things like a Marine Corps of one, or let the journey begin, or it's a great way of life. And that's really not to poke at the other services, but that's their style, and that's not what works for us. We're the few, we're the proud, we're the Marines. But at this point in Marine Corps history, recruiters like Staff Sergeant Garber, who I introduced back there, they're turning away 10 or 11 young men or women for every single one they take. The waiting time right now to become a United States Marine is about 7 or 8 months. When I was on recruiting duty from 99 to 02, we had something called kissing ships, which means we'd send a young man or woman up to swear in on a Monday, and we'd ship them to boot camp on a Wednesday or Thursday. There is nothing like that at all anymore. They spend all that time in the delayed entry program being molded and mentally and physically prepared by the recruiters before they go to recruit training. As a result, our recruits, the young men and women, are arriving at boot camp tremendously well prepared for the challenge. We've actually had several companies stand up this year at MCRD San Diego that had no initial strength test failures or post-enlistment disclosures. I had a sergeant major who'd been a drill instructor in the late 80s tell me, hey sir, by way of comparison, when I was a drill instructor here during that period, we'd often have 50 or 60% of a company that we stood up fail the initial strength test. Kids hanging off the pull-up bar like they'd been shot in the chest. You know, no north to south movement. But that's not happening. That's not happening today. Our drill instructors know that they're getting the very best raw material from our recruiters. To put it in the operational language of Marine Corps warfighting, our recruiters are creating an opportunity which is then being exploited by our drill instructors. And because those young men and women arrive at boot camp motivated, in shape, and ready to train, the drill instructors have that much more opportunity to develop their character and to take them to the next level. That very significant one-on-one time. I'm continually struck as I talk to those young Marines down there in the recruit depot who are about to graduate. So many of them had no male role model in their lives, or they would have been better off without the one they had. So to put these drill instructors in a position to where they can be that role model, be that example, and talk to them not only about being a United States Marine, but about being a man and about life, it's very, very significant. And if they're not having to circle back around and focus all their attention on getting a recruit to the point he should have been at when he started recruit training, they've got time for other things. I had the occasion in the fall. It was a real honor to present a Silver Star to a Vietnam-era Marine by the name of Joe Cordelleone. He'd been in some of the hill fights around Khe Sanh with Mike 3-3. But after I pinned that Silver Star on him, and what a true honor that was, he took the mic and he stood out in front of a pretty large crowd, and he said, "General Bierman," he said, "I just want to start by saying this place is a lot friendlier than I remember it being in 1967. But you know, I make a joke out of that, but I promise you, and it's very important that I send the message to all of you, that we continue to make Marines at MCRD Paris Island and at San Diego in a way that every single one of you would approve of and that you would truly be proud of. Our boot camp remains the longest entry-level training of any military in the world. It's unapologetically tough, and it remains a test of wills. Prior enlisted Marine General Robert Barrow once said, "My drill instructor lit a fire in me that burned bright for the next 40 years. And I will tell all of you that the current crop of drill instructors is cut from exactly that same cloth. But in conclusion, you know, what an exciting time to be a United States Marine. All the services have gone through a period of roles and missions and budgetary cuts, but the Marine Corps alone of all the services is going to be maintained at a higher level than we were at on September 11, 2001 when the planes hit the building. About 10,000 more Marines than we had in 2001, alone of all the other services which have been cut below that level. And that's because the American people are looking around at a dangerous and chaotic world, and they don't like what they see, and they recognize the need for a forward deployed force and readiness. But as I look around at the great things that Marines are doing around the world, as the commanding general of MCRD San Diego and the Western Recruiting Region, I can draw a direct line from those things that we're doing out there to the business of recruiting and recruit training. The linkage is just incredibly strong. You know, true readiness is measured a lot of different ways. People, training, equipment all matter, but the heart of real readiness is people, and we continue to put an extraordinary effort into making sure that the Marine Corps gets the right people, those who join not despite the fight, but because of the fight. But as we face an uncertain future, America continues to need its Marine Corps more than ever. We win our nation's battles and we make Marines, but you can't do the first if you don't do the second well. Those of us who have the privilege, senior enlisted officers, to lead the current recruiting effort, we recognize the fact that we're the guardians of an almost sacred process which has been bequeathed to us through a lot of sweat and hard work by some giants, some of the people I've talked about. But recruiting and recruit training remain the foundational start points of a ready, capable, honorable, and lethal Marine Corps. We wouldn't have it any other way, and that's who we are, and that's what we do. Thank you for allowing me to speak to all of you and to tell that story. Hoorah.
If I may, sir, on behalf of the Marine Corps Coordinating Council, all of your friends from all the organizations up here in San Francisco and Northern California, we would like to present your command. I want to be real careful because we're supposed to take care of the general and not get into the trouble. Present your command with one of the earlier printings of the James Montgomery flag recruiting posters that were generated at the beginning of World War II. And of course, James flag posters started in World War I, 1917, with some of the very earliest ones. I want you, you know, the Uncle Sam picture that we're also going to do. We will ship this down to you, sir. You don't have to have a heart attack when figuring out how you're going to take this home on the airplane. But we know you have a short schedule, but
No, sir, this is great. All I have to do is hang it in the front office for the command. I don't even need to tell the lawyers about it because it's.